Ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna do everything in English tonight. I don't know, some of you were present also this afternoon for the workshop. I'm gonna try to moderate, which mainly means that I'm gonna pass microphones to from people to people and try to introduce them properly. First of all, this event has been made possible only because of a joint effort of several partners. And I first want to start by thanking them all. First of all, Lisa Kinar and Dirk de Wet from Kunstenpunt, because they proposed to all the rest of us to invite Erika Balsom to talk about her newest publication. Felix de Klerk, the director of Kunstenpunt, who also agreed for paying some of the invoices linked to this invitation. Of course, I also want to thank Helena Kritis and Tom Bonte. They're respectively programmer and director of this institute of Beurschober, and they're so kind to host not only this event but also the workshop about distribution that took place earlier this afternoon. The fact that they incorporated this event in their Feminist Future program, which is running now, I think means a lot and tells a lot about their continuous engagement for the Brussels and Belgian art scene, and is also a great context to work in. Also to thank Ellen Medesone, Ken van Balsom, and everybody at Atelier Grafoui for co-organizing this event and also for the workshop this afternoon. Anouk de Klerk from KASK, I also see Marie Logie, who's also at the origins of the workshop last year, and we used their preparation for the workshop this year. But they organized the event yesterday with the people from Vidrom at KASK in Ghent, and also Laurent Salary and our team at Argos, we are also partner in this event and helped organizing the workshop this afternoon. And of course, I want to thank the artist Erika Balsom for being here, the artist Johan Grimont-Pré, Etienne Amir, Wendy Morris for talking later on. And it's an honor and a pleasure for me to introduce them one by one and giving them the microphone. And first of all, I want to give a very brief introduction of Erika Balsom. Erika Balsom is a senior lecturer in film studies at the Liberal Arts College in London. She studied and taught art at a lot of renowned places, such as University of Berkeley, California, where she held a Mellon postdoctoral fellowship, and the Carleton University in Ottawa in Canada, where she was assistant professor of film studies. The publication After Uniqueness, a history of film and video art in circulation, which I can recommend because even though she's an academic, it's very accessible. It's a very interesting publication. I think important to note is that she wrote this not from a curatorial standpoint, but really from the standpoint of being a writer, a very good writer, and a scholar. And besides her strictly academical intellectual activities, she also is, amongst other things, one of the trustees of Lux, our colleagues in London were also distributing. And she gives talks. She led, for example, last year in Oberhausen, the short film festival, she led the Oberhausen seminar. She's also author of other books, like Exhibiting Cinema in Contemporary Art, and she co-edited the publication documentary Across Discipline. At the occasion of this event, our library at Argos bought all her publications, so if you don't have the money to buy them all, you can always come and consult them at our media library. I give you Erika Balsom for a half-hour talk about this publication. Thank you very much.
So my talk today tries to set out some of the major claims of this book. It's a strange thing to do, to try and encapsulate a book in 25 minutes or so, but that's what I'm going to try to do. After Uniqueness is a project that I see as trying to do two things. One is to think about the history of distribution in artist film and video, which is something that I think there are little bits of writing on it here and there, but it's something that hadn't really been tackled in a kind of really extensive way, at least in the Anglophone context. But the second thing that it asks is for us to think about the fact that film and video are reproducible media. So what are the implications of the fact that film and video are grounded in an economy of the copy? So the first objective is a bit more practical, the second objective is a bit more theoretical, but I think that by taking them up together, we can understand something about this field of practice and also about the place of the moving image within the broader context of contemporary art. In film studies, one of the big questions in recent years has been the question of where is cinema, so thinking through the relocation of cinema beyond the context of the movie theater. And I think that's a very important and interesting area of study, but I also came to realize that there's a sense that it overlooks a kind of key point of inquiry, which is exactly how images get to these new locations. So what kinds of networks or distribution circuits do they pass through in order to enter into these different exhibition situations? And it struck me that answering that question meant thinking about the fact that film and video are reproducible media that are grounded in an economy of the copy. And so from the start, I'd like to make a kind of distinction between two kinds of reproducibility. The first is referential reproducibility. And this is something that I think has been talked about a lot in film studies. This is the idea that film produces a copy of physical reality. But the second kind of reproducibility, and the one that I'd really like to talk about today, is circulatory reproducibility. And this is the idea that the image can be copied and copied and copied so as to circulate widely. And this is a form of reproducibility that I think has received comparatively little attention when compared with the first. So if referential reproducibility asks us to think about things like indexicality or documentary or realism, circulatory reproducibility opens on to a very different set of questions. And that's the set of questions that I'm very interested in. So these are questions of authority, authenticity, and access. So I think that thinking through circulatory reproducibility today is an especially important thing to do in light of technological change. My starting point was really the conviction that digital media reignite the promise and the threat embodied by the copy since at least the development of photographic media in the 19th century. So on the one hand, the copy is a promise. It's a promise of democratization. It can allow for increased access. But on the other hand, the copy is a threat in that it can compromise authenticity and also potentially compromise authorial control. And so the promiscuous travels of digital images have given rise to a whole series of attempts that try and stop their circulation and somehow reassert the necessity of a controlled, authentic image. So this kind of movement between circulation and its suppression, right, or between abundance and scarcity, is something that I think we can see occurring really across film culture, but it's something that I think is especially important for what, at least in the UK, gets called artist's moving image. And that's because this area of practice is paradoxical in a way. On the one hand, there's a very long history in artists' employments of film and video in being drawn to those media precisely because they are not unique, right? So they challenge the uniqueness and the rarity of the traditional work of art. And that's why many artists have been interested in working with them, sometimes out of a political conviction. Yet, on the other hand, this is a field of practice that has very close ties to the art world and the art market, and sometimes full residence inside of it. And those are realms that continue to have very strong attachments to values like authenticity and uniqueness. So we can see that a kind of paradox emerges here. And it's a paradox that I think runs throughout the history of the moving image in art, but it's especially strong today. So today, we encounter the most highly regulated form of distribution in the history of cinema, which is the limited edition, alongside the most promiscuous form of distribution in that same history, the BitTorrent tracker or the unauthorized online download. So digitization has unleashed all of these new ways of circulating images, and they've also made us, I think, rethink the meanings and the modes of operation of forms of distribution that have long existed, like rental cooperative models. Distribution circuits in artist film have always been plural, but they've never been more plural than they are today. So on the one hand, we have Christian Marclay selling editions of The Clock for approximately $500,000 US each. And on the other hand, we have Kenneth Goldsmith making hundreds of works available, though in many cases illegally and in low quality copies, on his website, UbuWeb. So in short, and this is kind of, if there is a thesis statement of the book After Uniqueness, it would be that images have never been as free and as controlled as they are today. So what does it mean for us to think both of these things at once? Turning to an examination of distribution, I think means shifting our focus a little bit in terms of how we would write the history of artist film practices. This is a field that, in my experience at least, has typically been about writing about great films by very important filmmakers, right? So it's often about the individual artist. Writing about distribution means shifting away from that. It means understanding cultural production as a network, and really thinking about the way that the subject of artistic production is never reducible just to that one person who makes the work, but also encompasses what Pierre Bourdieu has called the entire set of agents engaged in the field. And these agents include, and here I will quote somewhat lengthily, the producers of works classified as artistic, great or minor, famous or unknown, collectors, middlemen and women, curators, etc. In short, all who have ties with art, who live for art, and to varying degrees from it, and who confront each other in struggles where the imposition of not only a worldview, but also a vision of the art world is at stake, and who, through these struggles, participate in the production of value of the artist and of art. So I think that the role that the middlemen and women of distribution play in the generation of artistic value has been perhaps far less acknowledged than some of the other agents that Bourdieu mentions. Certainly less acknowledged than the role of the curator, for example. But I would argue that it's no less important. Distribution participates in the generation of value. It participates in the formation of canons. It makes certain works widely available to be seen, while others remain inaccessible. So as Bourdieu notes, distributors are engaged in struggles with other actors in the field. And through these struggles, an understanding of art, or in the specific context of my research, I would say an understanding of the place of film and video within the art system is articulated. And this articulation is not necessarily explicit. It's maybe not even something that is apparent to the people that are involved with it because they're working on a day-to-day basis, not really stepping back to theorize how they are, through their practices, articulating a vision of what film means in the art world. So part of what I was interested in doing in this book is sort of examining particular case studies, moments of conflict, where we see this kind of question of the production of value becoming central. So I was interested in looking to those moments of struggle and demonstrating how these encounters determine the status of the moving image as an artistic medium. These moments of conflict tend to have to do with disputes over how we understand the meaning and character of reproduction. So whether it's something that is a promise or as a threat. In a certain sense, the fear of the copy is really thousands and thousands of years old. It's something that we see already in Plato. But absolutely, from the 19th century onwards, this fear of the copy becomes extremely pronounced. It takes on a kind of new character. So opposed to the machinic sameness of the copy is the domain of authenticity. And this is one of the key concepts that I work with to try and draw out the meanings of reproducibility in the book. So drawn from the museum and from the connoisseurship of art, authenticity is really a very polemical concept that seeks to revive a fullness of meaning and an unalienated state of being at a time in the late 19th century of increased secularization and industrialization, both of which prompted a crisis of absolutes. So the authentic is understood as diametrically opposed to the reproducible. It's supposedly outside of any kind of regime of equivalence. So it's firmly on the side of rarity and uniqueness. We're familiar, I think, from Walter Benjamin with the idea that the aura of the work of art withers in the age of mechanical reproduction. But there's also the sense, and Benjamin knew this too, and he acknowledged it in a footnote, that in fact the age of the copy produces aura. It produces a desire for authenticity and a denigration of the copy. So art in particular in the late 19th century was something that was proposed as providing a kind of nourishing reservoir of authenticity. And Lionel Trilling, in his seminal 1971 study, Sincerity and Authenticity, outlines all of this. And he says, quote, "As for the audience, its expectation is that through its communication with the work of art, which may be resistant, unpleasant, even hostile, it acquires the authenticity of which the object itself is the model and the artist is the personal example." So maybe the main question of after uniqueness is what happens when these two things, authenticity and reproducibility, collide with one another. What happens when the moving image, a reproducible medium that at least in the 19th century was aligned with the machine and with the sameness of copying? What happens when that enters the sphere of art, which is the privileged domain of authenticity and uniqueness? I think we can see how this would be a real problem for the value system that has typically governed artistic production. But quite interestingly, it's exactly the lack of authenticity and the lack of uniqueness that drew many artists to film and video in the mid-20th century. So the moving image in art, historically at least, has been aligned with access, and often a political commitment to the principle of access, and also with attempts to extract the work of art from an economy of uniqueness and rarity. Germano Celant has referred to the desire for the unlimited fabrication and widespread distribution of art objects as a small utopia. And he says that this is a dream that, quote, punctuated the 20th century across myriad historical and aesthetic contexts and moments, end quote. So for Celant, this is a trajectory that culminates in the 1950s and 60s with the vogue for sculptural multiples. So things like artist books as well, theoretically unlimited editions of sculptural objects. But we might just as easily claim that it's not in these artist multiples but actually in film and video art, and also the institutions that developed to support it, that we could really locate the true apotheosis of this counter-history of art, this small utopia of distribution. The history of artists' engagements with film and video is in large part a history of trying to democratize distribution and to disentangle the production of art from the intertwined regimes of rarity and commodity fetishism. So for instance, in prioritizing access, the rental model of the film cooperatives that developed in the mid-20th century could be seen, perhaps, as the most fully developed articulation of this idea of the small utopia. So according to this model, I'm sure you're probably all familiar with it, but according to this model, a filmmaker would distribute a print with a distribution organization, and that organization would then rent that print for a per-screening fee that would be split between the artist and the organization. So the institutions that were founded to support the fledgling field of experimental film in the post-war era took access as a guiding principle, and they really prioritized the ability to reach audiences. And this is something I think that we also see in some of the excitement around early experiments with video in the 1960s and early 70s. In 1964, Jonas Mekas wrote, "Our art is for all the people. It must be open and available to anybody who wants to see it." So we see here an investment in reproduction that has no real relation to the economies of scale that characterize mass culture. Even when a model of ownership was proposed in the 1960s in the American avant-garde, it was not about rarity, but about getting works to as many people as possible. So filmmakers like Bruce Conner and Stan Brakhage were very interested in selling their 16mm films as 8mm reduction prints, because these could be cheaply bought and shown in the homes of many people. 8mm was, in some sense, a poor image, to use Hito Sterl's term. It was a gauge that sacrificed image quality, but gained in the ability to circulate more widely. And Brakhage partnered with Grove Press to sell 8mm reduction prints of his film Lovemaking. And it's quite an interesting sort of episode because they were marketed not because of Brakhage's celebrity in experimental film circles, but rather as experimental pornography. So exactly the kind of thing that people would want to watch like in their homes instead of at cinema. So it's in part because of this interest in the small utopia of circulation and its defiant departures from uniqueness and authenticity and rarity that we see a kind of marginalization of film as an art form vis-a-vis the sort of mainstream art system, particularly in the US, in this moment of the 1960s and 70s. So the moving image entered art under the sign of the multiple, under the sign of reproducibility, and in a certain sense, it remains there. We can say that this small utopia of circulation has been absolutely reignited with the advent of digital distribution. Many artists are interested in pursuing new forms of reproducibility and also exploring the different aesthetic forms that are engendered by them. So we see a number of artists who actually make questions of distribution integral to their work. So in addition to someone like Hito Sterl, who I've already mentioned, we could talk about Aaron Barthol, who installed a DVD burner in a wall outside the Museum of the Moving Image in New York and called it DVD Dead Drop in 2012. Insert a blank DVD, it will burn you a program of films to take home with you. In 2009, Ben Simpson and Eileen White rediscovered a forgotten public domain film in Jordan and reintroduced it into the pirate markets of Oman. And here you can see the box of DVDs that they made. Perhaps more controversially, Josiah McElhaney pulled many historical avant-garde films off of UbuWeb and without the permission of the artists involved, projected them onto prismatic mirrors at the Whitechapel Gallery in low-quality copies, upside down, mirrored, and backwards. There are many, many other examples that we could name. And in addition to the many artists who make distribution an issue at the core of their work, we can also think about the ways that digital distribution, whether authorized or unauthorized, is today one of the primary ways that audiences see artists' moving image work. So I gather that Filipa Ramos from Vidrum was here speaking with you yesterday. We could also think about a private BitTorrent site like Karagarga, or again, a streaming site like UbuWeb. And UbuWeb in particular has been massively controversial, less so now, but maybe 5 to 10 years ago, within the experimental film community, because of course this is a community that has a very strong investment in medium specificity and a very strong investment in the moral rights of the artist, both of which are arguably put into jeopardy by this site. So, lots of artists are interested in pursuing distribution. And of course, there's still a kind of lack of fit between the values of authenticity that are embraced within the art system and the reproducibility of the moving image. But we have to recognize as well that over the decades, the moving image has increasingly entered into manifold associations with rarity and authenticity, particularly in recent years in the wake of digitization. So the moving image may have entered art as a part of Celan's idea of the small utopia, but over time, it's developed a very substantial affiliation with the economy of scarcity that it once contested. So we see the suppression of reproducibility in the art context in a number of ways, perhaps most prominently among them, the limited edition model, which is an increasingly dominant model for the sale of film and video on the art market. And in this model, works are sold as certified copies in editions of, say, 5 or 3 or 6, and accompanied by a certificate of authenticity and an extensive contract that specifies exhibition conditions, how you're allowed or if you're allowed to format shift the work, and so on. And so the co-op model was dominant, and to a certain extent still exists as an important presence. But increasingly now we see many artists, even some formerly aligned with the co-op model, moving into this form of distribution for their work. Editioning is sometimes seen as just artificial, just a way of making money, but I do think it's important to also say that it does provide a way for artworks to enter museum collections. Many museums have policies that they will not collect uneditioned works. So this is also a way of making film and video amenable to the policies of accession and preservation that major institutions have. So although there were some notable effects to edition film and video from the notable efforts rather to edition film and video from the 30s onwards, including this one, Gary Schum's video gallery Schum in Dusseldorf in the early 70s, the limited edition really fails to achieve any widespread viability until the 1990s. And this was a decade, of course, that witnessed a massive explosion of moving image art. And for a number of cooperating reasons, we see an increased viability of the limited edition as a model of sale, especially for artists, of course, like Matthew Barney, who are working in a kind of cross-media practice that is highly spectacular and working with very, very large budgets and crews. But also, we could say that the obsolescence of 16mm film made it more amenable to a regime of authenticity and uniqueness. So we have someone like Tacita Dean selling her work, Michael Hamburger, for, at the time, 80,000 euros. So the limited edition is a highly regulated form that is aimed at policing copyright, maximizing profit, and prohibiting unforeseen uses. But I think we have to understand that these financial reasons are not the only motivations that artists might have to suppress the reproducibility of film and video. Digitization has prompted an increase of interest in forms of control and rarity that lie outside the limited edition model and that have very, very different motivations that are not financial. So here we would find forms of live cinema, site-specific cinema, or the employment of artisanal processes that evade mechanical or digital reproduction. So we could think of the work of projector performance artists like Sandra Gibson and Louise Ricoder, which transformed cinema from a medium of the multiple into something that is instead aligned with the singularity of live performance. We could also think of Gregory Markopoulos's Aeneas, which was a work the filmmaker worked on for decades. It's an 80-hour film that's meant to be projected only in a single location in rural Greece that he named the Temenos. Markopoulos died in 1992, but the first Temenos screenings didn't take place until 2004, and since then they've taken place every 4 years. And I think it's impossible to understand the allure of these screenings and the kind of incitation to pilgrimage that they depend on without understanding them as the sort of absolute negation of the frenetic circulation of digital images that we typically inhabit today. We could also think about an artist like Luther Price, who undertakes very extensive labor on the film strip to produce one-of-a-kind originals through painting, scratching, and burying the film. And because they're so difficult to project, they actually change in each projection. So again, we see a kind of relationship to liveness, performance, and uniqueness. So I think across all these practices, we can say that they're united by the idea of cinema as an event, right? As a singular event, rather than as something that is a reproducible object. So as with the editioning model, they to some degree refuse circulation. But we can say that they do so out of very, very different motivations and with very different strategies. So now, to end, I think we can say that reproducibility creates a desire for rarity. But rarity creates a desire for reproducibility, right? So we end up in this kind of cycle. So in response to protocols of authenticity, artists embrace forms of distribution that privilege access over quality. And that means that today, limited edition works appear online as poor images, and peer-to-peer piracy networks proliferate. Artists start working with interesting forms of circulation and low-definition images. The moving image now has a very firm alliance with rarity, whether this is achieved through the limited edition model or through these other strategies that I mentioned, like the use of outmoded technologies or event-based forms. And this new affiliation with rarity is something that I think has tremendous implications for the ecology of institutions that surround film and video art, as well as how we locate the political values of these media. So in other words, what conception of film and video as media and what understanding of their relationship to the art world emerges through this changed situation. Yet despite this increased alliance with rarity, it's easier than ever before to gain access to artist film and video in various ways, especially through the vibrant informal economies that flourish online. So the utopian impulse of unfettered circulation may be gone, but in its place has emerged a forceful dialectic of rarity and reproducibility, in which images are both more free and more controlled than ever before. Thank you.
So each artist will talk about their own position, their own work, their own practice for about 10-15 minutes. And then Erika will join us as well, and we can have a group discussion.
So, hello everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I must say that first when we were invited we thought, oh, we are the bad example, actually, in this panel. But anyway, but thank you anyway, because it made us, it was an opportunity to think a bit about distribution. And it's a bit funny because we realized that actually we came to do video through distributing it. So actually we were distributing before even starting making video, and I will explain. So like Rolf said, we are from Israel and we studied there, and we met at the art school, and we started working together still at the art school, and graduated in 1999. And the context there was very different from here, and of course very different from today. And it's very important regarding our decisions or strategies. So I will just say a bit that back then in Israel there were no art institutions. There were 2 museums and a couple of commercial galleries. And probably because of this situation, our approach was something we can say radically independent. So
I think moreover, the idea of distribution. I lost my mic.
You shouldn't talk.
That should work. Both, yeah. The idea of distribution was completely foreign to art studies. It was this was something that you wouldn't talk about.
Yeah.
You just do your work in the studio, and then things will happen. This was the general atmosphere.
Yeah. So what does it mean to be completely independent? It means that we will work in other jobs to get enough money to produce our own work and to do on all the stages of the work. But the more radical thing, and we will also decide when to show it, where to show it, and maybe create our own opportunities and so on. So, for example, like in our graduation show, we distributed magnets saying, "Don't call us, we will call you." We never did that. We never called. They haven't called either. And after graduation, we decided to start our own platform. And funnily enough, it was more easy to get a virtual time. Internet was not an option in 1999. It was not somewhere you could show video or anything else. And we managed to get a time on TV, on what was called back then the local channel, which is like a local TV, but was actually broadcasting nationwide. And we got a slot on TV, and we thought we should show art in this slot, and this art should be art that is made for the screen. It was not something we made till that point. We were studying fine art, we did other things. And so we bought a camera, we bought a computer. We were not alone, there were 2 other artists with us. And started making a TV program and collecting artworks that we could show on this program. So by doing this, we started doing video ourselves, and this is how we started making what was called video art and maybe short films and so on. So through this TV program, it was a monthly program called Art Attack, and we did it during 2 years. Every month a new program that was broadcast 8 times during the week, so it was like a gallery with an opening hours. And through this program we found out about other possibilities of distribution, like festivals, it was completely new to us, or collaborations with other institutions that we did, like institutions abroad, out of Israel. And so just to explain, for example, in Israel itself, we couldn't show video in a gallery because the galleries didn't have projectors. They would ask you, yeah, we couldn't show your work, but bring a projector with it, because otherwise. Or when the Tel Aviv Museum wanted to buy our video work, they asked us to find out with some galleries how does it work, because they had no idea how to buy a video work. So this was it back then. In parallel, we were collecting also works for the program, and we started an archive. In parallel, some other people in Israel started collecting video art, and the first official archives came about. And these archives also started distributing a bit from their collections, like making programs, proposing it. Like there was a program in Argos, by the way, in 2002, I think, by the CCA in Tel Aviv, which was their archive is actually containing our Art Attack archive and so on. So, do you want to say something, or should I? Okay. So we continued a bit in this very independent logic till maybe 2006 or something like this. Although we left in Israel in 2002 and we moved to Europe and we stopped doing the program. And it's actually only in the recent 6 years, I would say, that we moved to a very different logic of functioning, producing, distributing, although I think we still do most of the distribution ourselves, but not in this kind of way. And I would say that the main change is related to the fact that we are now producing with some budget, some support, some subsidies, and this brings in a totally different kind of logic, because in a way you have to, there's a reciprocal idea that if you don't show it enough, you will not get subsidy next time. It's part of the thing somehow. Of course, we want to show our things anyway. It's not for the next, only for the next work, of course. So, and I think the main thing that has changed for us is and it's a very positive change, is the fact that we are now not anymore in the logic of working by ourselves only under our own conditions and with our own means, and then like a scientist preparing a bomb in his atelier, and then he hopes it will explode. But we make the process part of the distribution already, if I could say so. In a way, there are more people involved in the work, either as people who are working with us or co-producing with us, or just aware of the fact that we are working on something. And this partner thing is the main difference, I think, also in terms of distribution, because in a way your work becomes not only your own baby, but other people are involved. They also care about it. They also want it to happen. They also have something to say about it. We discuss it. It changes also in with their comments and so on. And I think it very much affects the distribution of it, of course. Just very practically, we are still, the thing that we do most is sending our works to festivals, writing to certain curators or programmers that we know, telling them about the work, but trying to tell them about the work even before it is there, so they know, they can have it in mind, they can think about it, they may propose some things. We don't have, Argos distributes some of our work. When we have a co-production with another company, sometimes they also do some distribution, but the main work is...
Well, the CPA as well.
Well,
And
it
so
depends
it depends on the project. I would say that right now, because we're kind of a hybrid kind of entity that works on both artistic platforms and cinematic platforms, it really depends on the platform itself, but also about the theme of the work and about what it evokes. And that means that for me, one of the most important things is to think about the objects that came out of the process and to see how it can be diffused. I mean, how this can work in the realm of festivals, of art galleries, art institutions, exhibitions, etc. To see where we can place it in those worlds.
Yeah, still at the same time, I still think that it's a very hard job to do it. I mean, I think everybody would agree. It's very frustrating, it's very exhausting, mentally exhausting mainly to keep this going. I mean, not the creative process, but to make it circulate. So.
Okay, thank you very much for this first case. Wendy, I just passed the word to you.
Yes, thanks. Is it working?
I think so.
Yeah, it's working. Okay, good evening. I started making short animated films in about 2002. And I always tried to get them out in two different venues, or on two different platforms. I tried festivals, short film festivals, animation festivals, festivals that featured women, African festivals, anything that related to the work I was making. And then I wanted to get them into exhibitions as well. And I always kept both going. And they were both very useful to me for different reasons. Festivals tended to give you a big audience. So a short film festival like Clermont-Ferrand has a Lago competition. I think they have 4 different programs, 4 different categories of that. But straight away you have 500 people in an audience and they'd show it twice in 10 days. So you have 1,000 people to see a short film just at one festival. So that was really, really useful. I mean, the idea is to get your film seen. But the problem with festivals is that they have a lineup of films. So my film would be in a lineup of 6 other films, which wouldn't really be films that I thought would go with my film. I mean, they curated these lineups, but I don't think they did my film much help, really, because my films are kind of these dark, little cryptic films that really need more than one viewing, and they were put together with some really great other animations that were far more likable, I think. And also for festivals, you get to write this 3-sentence description of your film, which is really, really hard, and you know, it doesn't really say anything about your film. But the nice thing about the festivals as well was you had the sense of community. Directors were usually invited, and there were discussions. Every director would get a chance to answer questions or talk about their work. And that was really nice because as an animator, I sit alone in my studio for months on end. And it was really just nice to get out, you know, and meet other people who made films. So festivals very, very useful, and very useful for CV because I've been lucky. I've had finance for almost all of my films. And to get finance for the next film, I think you need to have shown your film in a lot of festivals. I used to try and follow the FUF accredited festivals. They have an A list of festivals, and I would try those. But it's a bit haphazard how I send them up. I mean, there are some little festivals that aren't important, but are really nice little festivals, which I go for. And also it depends when the film was finished. I would never plan ahead. I was so busy making the film. Festivals were something I would consider, as I finished the editing. So festivals have been really useful, but the way I do want to show my work is on exhibition. And so all my films have always been on mostly individual exhibitions, solo shows. And that's ideal because I can control how the film is seen. It's in loop, so there's a slowness to the viewing. People can see the film twice, which really helps with my films. And also, it doesn't have to be a single screen work, it can be multi-screen. The exhibition on the museum now is started out as one film. I got finance for one film, and I very quickly realized it wasn't going to work as one film, and it became 6 films, some animation, some video, and an installation. Problem with that kind of thing is now I can't send that to a festival, really. I've identified one film out of that, which I am trying at festivals. But the exhibition is much better for my films. But I think in distribution, I've been with Argos from the very first film, I think. And Argos has always helped, but it's a very small part of distribution, really. Argos gets invited to send out curated programs, and then my films often go out, but I can't count on that. I do all myself, and there's never enough time, as Effie says, especially with the animation films, when it takes me 2 years to draw a 5-minute film. There's not much time left for following up with museums or curators or whatever. So this is always too short, and I really need an assistant for this, but I'll never afford one, so that's not going to happen. Yeah, I think what's really important is to build relationships with people, to do things for other people and hope that they will do something for you in return. I think that networking is really, really important in getting your work out.
Okay, thank you. Johan.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. I don't know where to start. For me, it's a larger discussion, and also the context of my work is that it's actually a discussion about collective memory. And why would collective memory have to be privatized? And I just about to finish a work. It's called All Memory is Theft, which is a whole sort of a vlog, a video collection of around the theme of the commons, Creative Commons amongst them, but also knowledge as a commons. Like, why would peer reviews in universities be privatized and being published in private publications that actually then ask Harvard, for example, tons of money every year, and all the budget is actually, instead of going to adding to the knowledge economy, and actually just spending this money to private corporations. So why would peer reviews? Of course, there's now a change in Creative Commons, where peer review scientific articles are actually being published as a commons on the net, and it's for free because students shouldn't have access, not have to pay for their own writings or thesis or whatever, but that is for free. I think this whole discussion would describe itself in the way one have access to a collective commons, a collective memory. Also, I'm always baffled if you walk in the city that actually our public spaces are being privatized by images that are coming from privatized corporations. And why are not artists and our public memory is not part of the inner city? Why is it all privatized? This is a public space, this is a part of distribution and circulation. And so why should the inner city not be part of how artists are dealing with disseminating collective memory? I think it's so crucial. I think the discussion is much larger. And of course museums are part of that, but they're inscribing themselves also into an economy which is much bigger. And I think a lot of my work, because I'm starting very large, and it's a big discussion, I'm throwing it open, but I think it's a crucial discussion, it's a very important discussion, because all those platforms actually should be much larger, I just come down from a discussion about the arms trade, and why is, for example, in the United States, half of the tax money is going to the defense industry. Why? Why is it going to private corporations who will make profit from actually killing other people? And why is so less going to the fact that we all have not enough time even to circulate our collective memory? I think that's a crucial course, I don't know where to start with my work because it's all very different according to the work. There's the vlogs that are available for free. Exactly, this whole thing about the commons is now, you can visit this whole, it's a 3-hour sort of selection, but it's supposed to be a vlog which is a 15 session workshop around the commons, but it's much more as knowledge as a commons. It's also the pollution as a commons, you know. Why should pollution not just be, you know, being corporations that don't respect the commons, just, you know, pollute the rest of what actually is shared by everybody. Anyway, I think it's a huge theme, and the work is gearing towards that as well. But you said it already, like Dao history would be, you know, you can download it for free in 7 subtitles. So, and I like that actually at the same time, it's also an edition. I'm describing myself, I'm not like, you know, an outsider. I also have Dao history as a limited edition, very high, it's 35 at the time, which is sort of a license contract which is sold to museum work, and they could show it in perpetuity and forever and make copies as much as they want. But also I have other licenses which is selling it to TV, but also has a home video distribution, which I did with others at the time, where, you know, and it could be downloaded from the net, of course, that's going to other places, but the license is not that it's public. Although I love it that actually, you know, I didn't know, but UbuWeb put our history immediately on the internet. You know, that here was a film about piracy and everybody was pirating it, apparently, which I like. You know, and I was recycling images. But then again, I saw then images of Dao history back in Adam Curtis, you know, Power of Nightmares. And I don't mind actually. It's part of a collective memory that is recycled. And, but it's not just this, I don't want to say this in things that it sort of should be a token and all this should be for free. Like for example, when Katrien David invited us for a video library to organize this sort of collective bank of images, which were not just video art, because it sort of sprung out of this faction with video library precisely in museums, but that also was part of our collective memory of commercials and TV, you know, other things that are mainstream. So in that video library were things like The Wizard of Oz, but also like found footage like Craig Baldwin, Tribulation 99, but also commercials. And it was interesting to put categories against one another, science fiction against Cannibal Tours, which is a documentary that turns upside down what is the exotic object actually the tourist as an exotic tribe, and to juxtapose those categories. But it was an open sort of platform where, you know, we pirated Wizard of Oz, but when it came to Matthias Müller, for example, I know that we had shown together with Home Stories that he likes to have it shown as a 60mm film. So there is the artist who, you know, there's a certain respect to colleagues where they prefer works to be shown in a certain way. So we asked permission, can we show your film on VHS? But we didn't care for all this big Hollywood production. We said, let's just do it, we just pirated it. So I think there's 2 sort of ways of how one can deal with that. There's the respect of indeed of an artist who invests so much time into something where indeed it's a labor, you know, and you're supposed to be paid for that as well. I think you should be paid for that. So it's also okay to make editions and not be paid for it, but also you want to have it out there. And so this is sort of the dilemma that very often I found myself in, you know. Do I describe myself in this sort of Kantian idea of the genius, you know, the privatized individual as an artist who is part of a mirror of what capitalist society is all about, and you help in this privatization process and whatever, you know. Or are you, you know, trying to break this open and you give it out for free, and you want, you know, as an artist, you want to communicate. You know, you make your work, but then the work starts. You want to have it seen. You make it for showing it to other people. So you're part of that network, and that's so crucial. But I think, you know, again, you know, subsidy is going down and down and down, and I think collective memory should be protected, and it should be part of like what happens to our taxes. We should all be part of that, how we decide, instead of like having it stolen by, you know, whatever, big agra, big pharma, big defense, to actually, you know, that there's something sort of next to it. Anyway, I'm rattling on, but I think it's an important discussion, and there's many facets of it. And, you know, I feel sometimes schizophrenic because, you know, I also want to keep going because money can give me the possibilities to make the next work, but then you inscribe yourself in sometimes in economy. So sometimes it's important to be a bit more intelligent, like with the edition of Dao History, we made the in-flight as well, which was an unlimited edition that could be printed as many copies as possible, which was part of the edition. So there was always an addendum where it was very democratic, where threw it open into, it could be circulated in a larger way. I think there's many many questions for everybody.
Yeah. Just short information that the history edition is sold out, but the Insight is still available. Maybe Erika, I ask you to join us and sit here. You can sit in the comfortable chair. I think this one. I mainly won't ask questions myself, but and give the opportunity for everybody to ask questions. Just one question to start and to open up a bit. Also linked to what you said and to the talk that Erika gave about her book. Very general. It's you said, Erika, in your talk that at this moment you have the two extremes. You have the most protected, formatted form of distribution with the limited edition, and on the other hand, the BitTorrent, which is the most accessible. I think all your practices vary between these two extremes, and a lot of artist practices do. And you also said it's also, I think it's more clear in your book, that both these extremes emerge at the end of the 90s with the rise of the internet. Obviously, there is a correlation, and I just want to ask, can you explain this correlation? Is there an explanation for it, why these both extremes emerge at this specific time? And for you, how do you work with it? How do you profit from it in your work? Because there you have the tension of an economical viability versus visibility of your work. Maybe it's too broad, but go ahead.
Sure. I do think there is a certain way in which these emerge in the 90s with the internet, but it's also much older than that. So there is a longer history, for instance, of selling film as editions that goes back to the 1930s, and Julian Levy, who is the New York dealer for the Surrealists. So I wouldn't say it's like a brand new thing in the 90s, but one of the things that I was interested in the book was thinking about the late 19th century and the late 20th century as somehow parallel moments when there is a kind of qualitative shift in the way that images can be produced, reproduced, and circulated that happens alongside a kind of wholesale reorganization of the fabric of life, right? And I think that in both moments we see that this new wave of reproducibility is accompanied by a big pushback. So that's the sort of dialectical movement I was trying to think about. So I mean the idea, I guess, is that authenticity becomes a value that is very dear and important to us precisely at moments when it seems to be under threat, right? And so we can see the late 19th century, early 20th century with the birth of cinema, and then the late 20th century, early 21st century with the birth of the internet as parallel moments when technological developments that are not only technological but also cultural, economic, aesthetic, etc., really prompt us to sort of search for some sort of reconstitution of uniqueness. And that happens in various ways in the 90s, not only with the limited edition, but also with these other kinds of practices that I mentioned.
And do you think, if Johan talks about the privatization of public space, that it also, which is more an ideological discussion, that it's also related to that aspect, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, for instance, the commitment to reproducibility on the part of kind of avant-garde filmmakers in the 90s was absolutely an ideological one. And for many artists now who are interested in pursuing various forms of circulation, it's also about reasserting the primacy of the commons at a time when it's absolutely under threat. But I think, I mean, Johan, one of the things that you brought out that I thought was really important was the idea of a kind of, I mean, you didn't use this term, but the moral rights of the artist versus sort of financially motivated copyright. So the idea that Matthias Müller is attached to 16mm presentation of home stories, that's not because of any financial reason, that's because there's a conviction that the work is meant to be seen in its kind of original format. And I think that that's a kind of important, that's a different kind of attachment to authenticity, right? That is also important, that's not reducible to, you know, making sure that your work is absolutely, you know, unavailable to any piracy. And I think that that kind of idea is especially important for artist practices.
Also, maybe you want the work to be shown in its best circumstances.
Exactly.
But she did allow to have it on VHS, which is very shitty, which I still used to teach. And
Me
he
too.
knows, he knows.
Is it something you feel, attention you feel in your work, the idea of belonging to some collective memory, or your work belonging to some collective memory, and on the other hand, wanting to protect it and having this kind of exclusivity at the same time?
Yeah, well, of course it is. It's always an issue because, for example, now we want to put some of our films available online, and yeah, I don't know if it will happen or not because we have to find out with the other partners if it's fine, if it's like I don't know. We didn't check it yet, but for example, we had cases of going into a club in Amsterdam and seeing our work, like the VJ uses parts of our work. We had no idea how it got there, and it's a very strange thing because it is somehow you in a way you experience it as a violation, but at the other hand you're also happy that it happens. So I don't know. It's
I think, well, for me, history-wise, there was a moment in the 90s where you, as a private person, you could broadcast. And this term, broadcasting, that was completely inscribed in the world of media, television, suddenly became private, and that gave a lot of, well, in a certain way, a lot of power to us as artists, or people that controlled how their work would be distributed. And I think it's still today because there's a factor of time as well, because you can play also with time. You can say, okay, in the first, well, I would say that the time span of a working festival is 2 years. In general, 2 years. It can go longer, but no, it's 2 years. Then you can play with how you distribute your work, and then it can go public, or after a couple of years. I mean, it's a thing that can be played through time. This is another factor.
Yeah, I find I try to get the funding for my films before I start, and once the film is finished, there's a kind of warm period, like you say, you know, for the film. After that, I don't really worry about it too much. I mean, I don't hand it out too easily, but I don't expect to make anything from it, you know. And I would like to have it be seen and be around. And I borrow a lot of other people's work, and I use a lot of other people's work in my own. So I'm not really fussed about it. There's a sort of moment when it comes out when it's new and you have this very strong attachment to it, and you want to protect it in some ways. But there's the schizophrenia also of wanting it to be seen but wanting to hold on to it. But I don't ever expect to make anything on my films, actually, once they're made.
But you don't throw them on the internet either?
No, I don't. I do keep it away, yeah.
What motivates that decision?
Because I see myself as somebody who makes things in the way that a scholar might write a book or write an article and then put it out there. And I think of myself in the same way. I make work and I put it out there. It's not something more special than that, I don't think.
But you said that you don't like to put it online.
No, I don't put it online.
Yeah, and that's why I was saying, like, what motivates your decision to not release the work?
Maybe to control how it's shown or where it's shown. But I don't know. It's just, why would I put it online and just give it away like that? I hand out DVDs fairly easily, but I don't know. It's that schizophrenic thing, you know, you sort of.
No, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question, and I think a lot of artists will say exactly the same thing. And I know, like, one of the things that I write a little bit about in the book is Vidrome, And talking to some of the artists who have appeared on Vidrum and to the curators who run Vidrum, they say that the limited duration of, say, the 10 days or whatever it is that the work appears is absolutely crucial, because if work was there in perpetuity, artists would just simply not agree to participate. Because there is a sense that, you know, for many people, they don't want their work available in perpetuity on the internet.
Yeah.
Even for people who in some instances have a certain commitment to circulation and access, etc. And I think that that's, you know, it's an interesting kind of thing to parse out.
But I think it's also hanging on to something in case there's interest somewhere, that it hasn't been flooded everywhere, that it's still something people can put money behind and to show somewhere. To me, so it's hedging your bets.
My experience with throwing things on the internet, which I like actually, I like sometimes, not all the works, but some works, that I see, even when history is on several sites, and I put it on YouTube as well. Now it's, you know, they work on it. They say, oh, you don't have the rights to the rest of it, but I do have the rights. We have to still clear that. And we put it on Vimeo as well. But I like it when the work is out there, but that does not exclude that actually it's still programmed in other places, it's still on TV, it's now at the Cinematheque, so one doesn't exclude the other sometimes, but it depends which work. And now with the recent Shadow World, which I would love, it actually goes on social media, but it's, my hands are tied because I didn't produce the work, and I think it would be, because of also its subject matter, it's about the corruption of the global arms trade, and I think as many people should see it as possible. And of course there's aesthetic, it's sort of hovering between straightforward documentary, it is within the constraints of investigative journalism, but also aesthetic elements in it as an artist, having made this sort of crossover. But because the distributors are holding on to it, they're afraid that actually that might actually damage the sales, which I don't think so. I don't think so. With Double Take, we also had we saw that actually while it was on the internet for free available, the DVD sales went up, ironically.
Well, I mean, I think it is interesting because we have this traditional idea that value is created out of scarcity, and that is true in a certain sense. But if you look at all about the way that, social networks function, you can see that value is also created out of circulation.
And not only economic value.
No, exactly, but cultural value and economic value. And I think that that's a kind of an important thing to keep in mind, so that, you know, I think even in the 90s there was this sense that the limited edition model was absolutely opposed or incompatible with a rental model of distribution, that they were somehow antagonists. And I simply don't think that that's true. I think that actually they can cooperate, so that, you know, we were talking about this earlier, that Argos rents certain works that are also available for sale as editions, and Lux in London does the same thing. And for me, that kind of initiative, or the kind of multi-platform stuff that you were talking about with Dal History, those for me are really promising examples of how to get around some of the problems of the limited edition, because those problems are very real in the sense that with that level of rarity, sometimes these works just disappear after they've been collected.
Right.
They're just not around to be taught or spoken about or written about.
You can make it part of the conditions. Huh?
Yes.
Like you could, like for example, when Dal History, it's a license, a valid license actually, but in that license it's stipulated that it also will be distributed. It was at the time it was not an online platform yet fully, but that it would be distributed as VHS, but not for public use. But still, you know, what is the internet? So now it has, it was there as well. But you can write that into whatever you sort of read and deal with, in the way you deal with museums or you deal with collectors, or, you know, there's a way to circumvent it.
This is the thing with these acquisition contracts, you can make them whatever you want. You can say, you know, like the room has to be painted orange. You can really specify down to, you know, the last detail how the work will be presented, but that includes making allowances for other forms of distribution. And I mean, I really wish that more artists did write those kind of provisions into their contract.
But maybe this is part of the the reason why many artists wouldn't like to put their work on the internet, because you cannot tell the spectator, don't eat while you watch my film, and don't, you know, turn off the light and all that. So I think controlling the context context is maybe part of the
It's
control
what we're trying to
that the artist wants.
Absolutely, and I think there are certain works that do really lose an immense amount of their power when they're taken out of that primary exhibition context. But I mean, I think that maybe it's also about educating people to understand the difference between the primary context and something else like what Sven Ludeking calls, you know, a viewing copy, or these kind of secondary formats of presentation that are maybe not the thing itself, but you know, a kind of proxy for it. The way that we know when we look at a reproduction of a painting in an art history textbook that we're not seeing the painting, but it still gives us some sense of what it is or could be. I mean, I teach an MA class called Artist Moving Image, and it's very difficult to get access to certain works to show in the class. And then you just think about how, you know, how cultural value accumulates around these works if they're not being shown.
It's exactly the example that I wanted to give. I mean, us in the 90s in Israel as art students, we were kind of magazine art students. This is what we did. This is how we saw art, because we didn't have money to go to Europe to see all those things in or wherever, or to go to galleries. So, but we had in mind. I mean, it was clear for us that what we were seeing is just a representation or demonstration of what a proposal is. So there was a kind of hierarchy. We knew that to see the texture, to see the real thing. I mean, there's a size here. There's texture to it. There's a whole world in it. And I think when you see a film, or most people, when they see a film on their, on their 17 or 15 inch screen, they still think they see the film, which is, I think, not true. It's not the same experience. And I think when most people would think that it's not the same experience, then the value would there will be certain degrees of distribution.
Okay, I have a lot of questions myself, but maybe it's more interesting that you can ask your questions. I don't know if there are questions from people in the room for any or all the people on the stage. No? We still have some time. Was it that complete? No. I see some people with questions but don't want to dare to ask them. Okay. Yeah.
I think when you put your film on the internet is so wide, so huge, so you have no real ways in it. So I think also, is there not something like always wanting when you distribute, not only we're talking about the value, the economical value, the fact is that you want to be connected to affinity. So, and now I'm thinking because the idea of now the VOD, of the platforms and so, it seems interesting to me, more interesting, like a spectator, to have, in fact, instead of looking at YouTube and finding some more films randomly, that I'm a little bit guided by free and guided at the same time to be connected to community. So I'm thinking like platforms like Tank or Mubi or so, where you have already some curatorship which helps you to swim in the enormous amount of films, because it's really, and that's also, I think, what for the artist is maybe also a little bit strange to put in the big wilderness this film, because who will see you? Even if you want to see very broadly, you still want to be in a context, I think.
It's true, when you throw on YouTube, you actually give it over to a corporation again. It's a corporation that disguises itself as a commons. And so I think it's crucial that, you mentioned Uberweb, but that all these sort of artists run, or not only necessarily artists, but that these sort of common distribution circles that create a context that actually, lies the agency with the artist or with the curators. And so it stays within this collective affinity, as you say. And that's indeed very crucial. That context is so crucial.
Isn't there a too big of difference of knowledge that the artists, the creators, don't know enough about the possibilities, but also about the legal things of the internet, and the corporations know too much? Like, for example, YouTube, if you put something on YouTube, they can use it, sell it to third parties for whatever price they determine. They run the show.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was actually teaching yesterday Hida Sterl's In Defense of the Poor Image, and she says that, these digitally circulated images are the wretched of the screen, the garbage that washes up on the shores of the digital economy. And it's like, well, maybe, and maybe in 2009 or whatever, when that essay first came out. But, if you haven't seen it, I would recommend to everyone this 2-minute video on the YouTube website that explains their content ID system. And this is a system that has an algorithm that scans all of the video that's uploaded to the site and identifies it for possible copyright infringement. And when they identify a match, and they can identify matches also that are of lower quality than the reference file, so poor images also can be identified. When they identify a match, they contact the rights holder and they say, do you give permission? Do you want it taken down? Or will you keep it with advertisements? And the money goes to the rights holder. And this kind of monetization of unauthorized circulation is something that I think, many people still act as if appropriation and recirculation are inherently tied to the commons. And it's simply not true anymore. They can be, but on YouTube they're not.
But if I can just change this a bit, I don't really care if my work is seen on internet somewhere, because there's no feedback. When I make films, I want to communicate. So to show my work in a festival where there are going to be questions and things afterwards, or to show my work in an exhibition where there's some kind of feedback, this is rewarding to me. More than that I don't actually need. So I don't even need to think about all of that, because to me there's not really anything in it for me. Yeah?
For me, of course, it's from artist to artist, I get it from filmmaker to filmmaker. But I'm happy when, that this is used by way of even YouTube or Vimeo or the links I send, that it's used as an educational tool to teach. And so it circulates in a way where it creates additional dialogue. And in the long run, I think it has created an audience when I bring a new film out, that actually it's those people that actually are watching the new films. And so it does create a circulation, and on many, many platforms. And for some works I really do encourage that. Like, I think for Dao history, the theme is also piracy, and piracy comes back from, I don't know if we want to dig into the history of piracy, but I think, piracy is also something that I think if you could call the whole YouTube factor actually piracy, it's piracy but from the bigger thieves, And I think it's
legalized piracy.
Exactly. And so I think that the art world and the world at large suffers from that enclosure of the commons, and that indeed maybe there should be more awareness of more knowledge about how one can create creative common platforms that are shared by artists, where you feel more comfortable and you feel that affinity, and there is something coming back. But we live in a world where everything is being stolen, and then it's disguised under but you can do it for free, and then it's like you get a free Google account, meantime all your surveillance and your data are being stolen. But it's always under the guise of anyway, I think it's an important discussion, and I think we should be aware that, I so much encourage also the Creative Commons that, it protects the maker as well, and it's maker-based connection where those are the ones who are then in control of that circulation, and it's so crucial. I think like Argos or it doesn't have to be artists, but it could be alliances with the education, because I think universities should be, why do we spend all these taxes on research for pharmaceuticals, and then big pharma is patenting, and then they give you a big prize for sort of medicine. And it's the same with images, the circulation of images. I think it's so crucial to claim that space back.
Yeah, but wasn't it also in your question, just to clarify, that the internet has the disadvantage that the authenticity or the quality of something is not certified by some curatorship or by some selection, so that there's just too many without selection, or
It's not about authenticity, it's about how you connect, how we can understand something about it.
It was more how linked to it, who mentally even to understand it, to understand why it's there, and so really the paysage, the landscape of it, and so because you could also see sometimes you see films, and if you don't understand how it's made or from whom, you don't even understand what it's telling or what you should feel, because it's too disconnected sometimes.
No, I'm schlepping around an archive when I teach of thousands and thousands of films. And so at SVA, I shouldn't say that, I'm not allowed to say that actually, but at SVA in New York, where I teach, I said, okay, I donate this whole collection to the school, so everybody who's studying there has access. They're all MP4s, they're very shitty quality. But I still think it's sort of for the circulation of, the fact of for education as such as knowledge, knowledge, shouldn't be privatized. It's more and more that universities, anyway.
that's an important point.
It is, yeah. And then I was talking to somebody in Athens. This is the curator from Capacete. He just got this selection of 15,000 films, and but he said, for me it's the gift to Capacete, which is sort of a cultural center in Rio, where artists go to watch things. And I think if Hollywood steals all our shit, then I think we should steal it back sometime. Anyway, but the whole discussion, there's two. It's Jan said that. I also think that we should respect the fact that making a film is a labor. It should be respected also in that sense.
On the other hand, I think that if you put your film on the internet, you should also be responsible and send to people, let people know that it's there, or try to create your own réseau, your own network, and to send people while knowing that they would send it to other people if they like it. But of course, if you made a decision to take part of this game or to put it there, then but still you have to try to control or to try to create your own circulation.
Nog vragen? Andere question? Other questions? Yeah. Dan, you have a question as well?
It's maybe a bit different. My question is just a general curiosity that I have is if any of you or from the experience of Argos, if you have a feeling that the audience, and I'm saying it in very general terms, is the interest growing? Like, can you see that with accessibility, there's more curiosity? Like, you have a library, are there more people asking to have access to study things? Like, really very broadly, like, how much love do you feel, or curiosity do you feel coming from an audience?
Institutionally, quickly, just the amount of love you feel is directly related to the effort you put into asking people to love you and to come. On the other hand, I can only confirm also what Johan says, is that History is a film from 1999, which is 27, so it's 20 years old, and it's still one of the best distributed films in Argos. He won't get rich of it anymore, but it's still one of the best distributed films we have, even though it is available for free on the internet. So I think from our perspective, and institutionally we cannot do everything, but it's the best thing that works is a layered approach, and it's also what you argue in your publication, I think, and what Johan says and what you kind of confirm as well, that it has to be a multifaceted approach in order to gain the love. Yeah?
Well, it's an act of generosity as well. It's an act of generosity. But I think we're all like sort of trapped in this bubble of the celebration of the individual, I think, and it's so crucial to sort of to look for alliances, to be generous, I think, and then things come back. I believe in that. That's the common, I think, anyway. I don't want to be the preacher of the common or whatever.
Yeah, but I think this generosity should start from the beginning of the process. You're working on something, you share it with others, you speak about it, you have new colleagues for the way. So I think it doesn't start when the object is there. It starts already in the beginning of the process.
Yeah, of course. I think every artist being creative is actually, everybody, you try to be creative, you try to make a more beautiful world, and next to it you still have to look for your job and pay your money. It's an act of generosity.
Is it also turning around expectations and saying, as Wendy says, she doesn't expect to gain any money once the work is done. So normally in artwork, the artist gets his money after the work is sold. Like in your practice, you should, if I understand you well, try to be financially rewarded before the work is done, in making the work, and then afterwards having a focus on how to circulate and how to distribute and make it visible as good as possible without necessary economical return.
That's the way it works for me, yeah.
A good example is also Francis Alice, for example, where you can, even for exhibitions, download all of his work from his own website, and where he explicitly says that you can show it in exhibitions without paying. I think the same for you. The more effort you put into it, the more love you get. No? I think you had a question as well, the young lady, no? Or no? Somebody else? Question? Remark? I think then we can round up. I want to thank Erika, Johan, Wendy, Amir and Effie for being present, for the good discussion. It was almost a discussion without questions, so it was a good talk. It was animated, lively, and I think everybody go to see the show of Johan in Cinematheek, which opens. You don't have an exhibition right now, eh? So you still have to wait a little bit. They just got funding for their next project, and then everybody has to go to Ostende to see the show of Wendy. And of course, you all have to buy the book of Erika, which is very...
Or get it from a library.
Or come to the Argos library, of course. Copy it. And copy it.
Circulate a PDF amongst yourselves. Without my permission.
Thank you very much for your kind attention, and enjoy your drink.